So again, welcome back. Hopefully you had a good 4th of July weekend. Let me look at, yeah, absolutely. And essentially what we're going to do is that we're going to go towards the last two classes of the semester. And one of the things which I wanted to check with you, if that's okay with you, would be for next week. Would you all be okay if we moved it a day earlier and met on Tuesday? Same time. It would be great if you could let me know if that would work for you. If it will not work for you, and if I can record it and then place it on, would that be okay with you? Let me just make sure that even if it's not okay for one of you, at least who's here right now, then we'll stick to the same time frame. So I'll just let you finish while I close the door and we can start. Andrea, if there's going to be a problem, that's fine. Let's look at. Okay, so McKenna, either way, then I guess you're looking at a recording. No, but next week will be relatively short. No, please, again, I am asking a request of you. So essentially, what I wanted to do was I had something come up at my personal life where it was an event for my daughter, and I wanted to actually go and attend the event. But if it's going to inconvenience you guys, my priority is you guys as well. So essentially, that's fine. I'll just check with all of you, and if most of you say it's okay, then let's do this. But one of the things which I also wanted to discuss with you is the following. I know that for every assignment, I had each one of you ask me questions. Some of you had questions and clarifications. And I made all of you a promise, and that is something that I want to follow up as well. Is that would it be possible for me and each one of you to let me know if you would like to have a 25 or 30-minute conversation with me one on one? Because I think I would like to answer some of your questions. And this is a great format where we have the video technology and the web technology and everything else. But I still feel that sometimes it's hard for you to communicate with me one on one. So what I'll be doing at the end of today's session or tomorrow would be that I'll be sending you some time slots, and if you would like to have a 30-minute one-on-one session with me where I can also answer some of the questions you might have from all of the assignments that you have done. That is something that I would gladly take it. But if not, what we're going to do is that next week I will try to do a wrap up of all the things that we've done, including try and explain to you where the different assignments that you did fit into the concept of CRM as well, right? So that's pretty much what I'm going to do. So you could expect an email from me. You should be expecting an email from me with a request for actually having a one-on-one. There is no obligation for you to do that. It's only if you're interested. So that's something we'll do. And then for the others who cannot make it next Wednesday or next Tuesday, depending upon what we agree upon, then I think today might be the last day when we'll have a chance to interact as well. So what I want to do today is the following. Today is going to be one of those things where I want to interact and have you guys talk a lot more about the concept of the service profit chain. That's your assignment number 5. But before we do that, I want to kind of finish and wrap up what we discussed in class last week. And then after that, let's have a discussion of the service profit chain, which for me is the essence. Your ability to deliver great customer solutions and great customer service is what is going to help you maintain the relationship with your customers, right? And that is one of the things that I want to actually kind of wrap up today's session with. But before we do that, in the last class, we were talking about the concept of services. And if you remember, we talked about services as being deeds, processes, and performance, right? Now, what I want you to do is that I want one of you to unmute yourself and again remind me, why is it that we're talking a lot about services in a class on CRM? One of you, if you could just unmute yourself.
So
Yeah.
that service effectiveness, right, and leveraging that to drive retention is absolutely key on the communication, which is driven through the CRM.
Indeed. No, indeed. But CRM, if you take a look at it, but how did we discuss? What are we looking at in terms of CRM? Is it a technology or is it a philosophy or a strategy for an organization?
It's the communication flow philosophy, right? It's the fact that we have to
There
share
you go. Okay.
communication and customer positions
Indeed.
across all facets of the organization.
Absolutely. So CRM is about a strategy about how we place the customer and take care of the customers. Not always, when I mean taking care of the customer does not mean that always bending over backwards. It's also making sure that you set the right expectation. So it has got to do with communication, but the communication has to be as much with the customer as it is internally to your organization, because the promises that we make to the customers have also to be relayed internally so that everybody within my organization knows what has been communicated to the customers. And the inability of the people within your organization to understand what has been communicated to the customer could lead to discrepancies in what is delivered to the customer that could lead to a lot of issues, and that would lead to customers not being happy. And if we want to talk about customer relationship, it is about keeping your customers happy so that happy customers are likely to come back and give you more business. While that makes intuitive sense, the service profit chain article that you read actually illustrates the point very, very clearly about the importance of keeping your customers happy. Because customer relationship, if you take a look at customer relationship management, is it about managing the relationship with your customers, then delivering on your promises is extremely critical. Now, why are we talking about services is actually the fact that we discussed in the last class that almost everything that we sell today has a service component to it. Right? We might sell a great product, but along with a great product, we might provide additional value-added services, like in terms of delivery times, could be in terms of customization, could be in terms of customer training, could be in terms of handling an issue that the customer has. And every aspect of a solution that you provide has a product component, but also has a huge service component. And the service component of it is usually where things can actually go wrong. You might have a fantastic product, right? But it's in the execution of how the product is helping the customer where things could go wrong. It's in the execution of your service, in the execution of your value delivery promise that things can go wrong. And that is why we spend a lot of time on understanding the basics of services. If you don't deliver this service, essentially what you're doing is that you're not able to meet the requirements of the customers. And that leads to a lot of issues, which will have an impact on your customer relationship. Again, another hint for you is that we said at the beginning of the day is every company, if you want to maintain a relationship with your customers, it is about providing solutions to the customer. We began one of the first sessions by talking about the concept of solutions. Why should we provide solutions to customers? And we said solutions are an answer to the need of a customer, and a solution is going to be a combination of my product, my service, and my brand. And even when I provide a solution, there is a service component to it. And while you can make sure that your product is great, it's in the service delivery again that things can go wrong. So that is why we spend quite some time in terms of understanding the basics of services, right? So hopefully, again, just to jog your memory, again, services are an integral part of your offering to your customers. What do I mean by an offering? It's a combination of my product, my service, and my brand. That's what we discussed in an earlier class. And when I do this well, I have to make sure that despite my products and making sure that my products work well, I should also deliver on my service promises. And what you'll see invariably is for every organization that is out there, if you go take a look at the offerings that you have in terms of your product offerings, what do I mean by product offering? If I'm thinking of Andrea in education, then providing an education or a course is your product. But it's how you bring the course to life is the service component to it. If you take a look at what McKenna does, if you're in the hospitality industry, then of course there's a product which is your room or your vacation package. That is the product. But it's how you make that package deliver an experience to a customer is the service part of it as well. So that is where things can go wrong. And so we said if we need to understand what are services, it begins with clearly understanding how we define services. And the example and the definition of a service that you see on the screen out here is deeds, processes, and performance. And in last class, we spent quite some time on the concept of what are deeds and what are processes. We said deeds are actions that we take to fulfill the needs of the customers, right? And in terms of the needs of the customers, we talked about three specific kinds of needs. We talked about the Kano model. We talked about the basic needs, the performance needs, and the excitement needs. And then we said, as a firm, what we have to do is that when we are delivering a solution and there is a service component to it, our priority is to fulfill the basic and the performance needs first before we focus on exciting the customers. Any idea why we said we have to focus on basic and performance first before exciting the customers? Can one of you, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong file. Can one of you just unmute yourself and say why we have to focus? Yeah.
This is Randy. The reason you need to focus on those two is when you start wowing your customers, that grows into their expectation, and you'll have to work hard just to even keep them satisfied for next time.
And more importantly, the fact is that there's one more thing out there is that excitement is nice, but more importantly, what is critical is the fact that basic and performance needs are needs that the customer thinks is mission critical for them. It's important for them to have that, right? And as I described, an excitement need is a nice to have, but it's not essential. So before we start talking about wowing the customer with kind of needs that they do not even think is important, it's much more important for you to fulfill the basic things and the performance needs that they mention. And essentially, once you fulfill that, and then you might want to consider an excitement. Why is it important again for you? When I'm delivering a service, right, I need to make sure that the basic needs and the performance needs are first met before I can start talking about exciting the customers. We also said exciting the customers is always nice, but you should be careful because excitement very quickly becomes the expectation. If you take a look at the way we defined it, let's say, for example, when does a customer become excited? A customer becomes excited when you do or fulfill a need that they did not even know existed. But the moment they have a wow factor, what happens to the need? The need becomes a performance need because now they know that they had a need and that need could be met. So what happens then is that the expectation goes up, which means that your cost to serve, because if you have to deliver that same level of service and if the customer is not willing to pay for it, then it becomes an issue. So again, when we said services are deeds, processes, and performance, deeds are actions that we take to fulfill the needs of the customers. And again, within the needs, not all needs are the same. Some needs are more important than the others. And what you will see is that a lot of times you will see that sometimes you either lose customers or you have dissatisfied customers when actually the basic and performance needs are not met. So despite doing a good job and in some things where you do a wow factor, but if the basic things are not met, the customer is not going to be happy. So again, if I want to jog your memory again, basic needs are what I call must fulfill needs. Performance needs are need to fulfill. And then excitement needs are nice to fulfill. That again, if you don't do it, that's fine because the customer is not going to penalize you for it. So that's what we began by trying to understand that. And then we said, well, okay, that is great. And then we started talking a lot more about the concept of processes, and we talked about the customer's workflow. Again, I talked about something which we refer to as the service blueprint, and I gave you an example. A service blueprint is an example of where you map the customer's process, the customer's journey, and you try to map every part where the customer comes in contact with you either directly or how do other people within my organization have to work together to fulfill the needs of the customers in every touch point. And that is something that we talked about, and that is usually where a lot of services might fail because of the inability for the people who are facing the customers to always communicate what are the needs of the customers within their own organization. And essentially that is the whole point of what we'll discuss today, because if there are loopholes, if there are gaps in the way your processes are linked to the customer's processes, the customer's needs could not be met, and what impact does it have? The customer is going to be unhappy, and from the viewpoint of customer relationship, an unhappy customer is less likely to come back, so which means that it has an impact on your customer retention as well. So understanding what a service blueprint is and aligning your different internal organization to work together with the customer becomes a key aspect as well. And again, because this is a class on marketing and sales, you will find out that in many cases, and in the first module on the second class, sorry, I suggested a reading to you which was called Ending the War Between Marketing and Sales. And there was also another article that I talked about in terms of silo busting, right? Now, if you can go back and if you remember what were some of the key concepts, or go back and take a look at it, again, if the people who are facing the customer work in a silo that is removed from the people who have to work in the back offices to fulfill the needs of the customers through the sales or service people, if each of them work in silos, the chances are that the customer is the one who has to pay the price. So for example, if sales and marketing do not talk to people within their own organization, maybe the people in supply chain cannot plan the production so that when the salesperson makes a promise of a delivery, that people within the organization cannot actually meet that. Or it could be that sometimes the kind of service that is sold by the salesperson might not necessarily match how your internal people are trained to fulfill the needs of the customer. So you have to understand the processes of the customer and link it to your internal process. And when you take a look at the internal process, that is why it's very important for you to understand that when a customer has many processes, every process that the customer has have certain needs linked to it. And you have to understand which of those processes are critical by identifying for every process, is it a basic performance or an excitement need? And the more basic and performance those needs are, the more you have to make sure that your internal processes are aligned to fulfill the needs of the customers. Right? And that is hopefully something that you actually can make connections to in terms of what we have seen in this class. And that brings us to the last point, which is how would I define a service? It's called deeds, processes, and performance, right? And essentially, what we need to take a step back is that a performance is what is you as a service provider, what are you going to realize if you're able to fulfill the needs of the customers, and you are going to completely map the customer's process and help the customer at every step along the way, so that when a customer comes to you and says, you know what, I had certain needs, I went to this company and I had a fantastic experience every step along the way, they did a great job and they fulfilled all of my needs. What happens then is that the customer then evaluates their service experience. And now walk me through it. What happens when the customer feels that all of their needs were matched by the right kind of actions that you took? When the customer feels that when they went through the process of receiving the service from you, that every step along the way you had aligned your processes so that the customer felt that they were well taken care of. So what's going to happen is that the customer is now going to start evaluating you based on, hey, going in, this is what I expected from this solution provider or service provider, and this is what I got. Does this make sense? How many of you have actually taken a survey where it says on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely will you recommend this service provider? Anybody remember seeing something like this or taking part in surveys? Yep, Randy, that's absolutely right. That is called the Net Promoter Score. Now, the Net Promoter Score is actually an indication of your customer being satisfied. And when they say, hey, I am going to be delivering, when they feel that I'm satisfied, then I'm going to be loyal to you. So a Net Promoter Score is a measure of loyalty, but you're not going to get loyalty if the customer is not satisfied, right? So Brock, I'm just going to, when you say every day it feels like, so can you explain what you mean by that? Or did you want to type something else?
No, I just mean you ask how often or if we've ever seen it, right? It's
Sorry, yeah. So,
it's
yeah,
just
you feel it every day.
in our reality. And then, every day I see, not only do I get a request, right? Like my Ford dealer constantly, hey, how was our last service?
Yeah.
And I never do them. But then I'm the one on the receiving end of always getting these things, right? Like the NPS form
Indeed.
back from a call.
Indeed.
So yeah, I mean, it's I guess I see it every day from both ends. And
Absolutely.
it's funny. I probably shouldn't admit to this, but I only act on it when I'm on the receiving end. So go figure.
Absolutely. Now, I'm curious. One of the things that we'll have is that, Lexi, I know that you work in a different kind of business. You're in the distributor kind of model. So, do you guys do a lot of customer satisfaction surveys or evaluations?
No, we honestly don't because I wrote about that in my assignment today. It's just like kind of a weird thing because like we're assigned certain accounts like in a certain area and we like operate those accounts as like individual business entities.
Yeah.
So I guess if like something really went bad, then they could obviously like reach out to our headquarter here in Indiana, but for the most part, yeah, we don't really have any of those. It's kind of a weird thing because it's also like predetermined. So like if you have a liquor license, then like we're going to service you no matter what.
Yeah.
But like I guess they could like as far as like I sell at a chain store, so depending on who like services them better and like gives them better service, the more like displays you get of certain liquors and the more products you can bring in. So that's kind of how that works. But yeah, it's definitely a little bit different. Like when I was doing the project,
Indeed.
like my company is definitely one of those like service profit chain kind, but we don't do everything that's kind of on that. So
Well,
kind of like an anomaly.
Indeed. Now, one of the things you'll find is that not depending upon the kind of business that you're in, you don't need to do all the steps, huh? But I'm really curious to see, because in your case, either way, are you like a monopoly that they have to work with you, your retailers?
Yeah, they don't have a choice. Like, in the United States of America, when Prohibition ended, they came up with a 3-tier system to, like, make sure there isn't any corruption. And so there's like a person a supplier that makes it, and then there's a wholesaler which is me, the distributor, and then there's the like retailer. So if you have a liquor license, like you don't have a choice. Like you can only buy the products that I supply through me. So like there's 2 other there's beer suppliers too, but there's 2 other main like wine and spirit suppliers in the state of Indiana at least. And like I sell Captain Morgan, for example, and I'm the only person that sells Captain Morgan, so they couldn't like get Captain Morgan from anyone else if they wanted it.
Nice. Now, I envy you, Lexi. That's what I'm saying. How many of you have that luxury of being a monopoly almost? Maybe Andrea, you, or do you also have competition, Andrea?
No, I have competition because Indiana with the school choice.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, students can. I'm in Fort Wayne. There's several private schools that the kids can go to, and we have a competing Catholic school on the south side of town. So, there's lots of competition in education when you really look at it.
Got it. So now I see what you mean. So it's very interesting because I think we understand this, but those of you in competition, you more or less know the criticality of making sure that you constantly evaluate whether the customer is satisfied or not. And I'm also curious to see, Lexi, does it mean that you have no kind of KPIs that evaluates whether your customer is satisfied or not? Not with the product, huh? Because Captain Morgan is Captain Morgan, right? But you could go wrong with merchandising, with delivery times, or if you have a case that is damaged kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Or improper paperwork and stuff like that. So is there somewhere where the customer can vent their frustration with you? Not with you, but with your organization?
With me.
Okay,
my phone number. Yeah, just because again, like we act as their own business entity, and I'm kind of like taking care of them. If they like have any concerns, they typically just like reach out to me about it. And then like say I don't respond, then they have like I have a manager that's over my area and they can reach out to them. And then if not, we do have a customer like care number. I guess if things got like really, really bad, which they shouldn't ever get to that point just because
Yeah.
there's so many points of contact between then and there. But we do have a customer care number that we give to all of our like accounts that if they needed to like call for billing or anything like that, they can call.
Got it. Okay. So then I guess, again, as I said, hopefully that it never comes to the point where you have a legitimate competition for certain things, but for everybody else who is there in a world where there's competition, this is something that you absolutely have to make sure that you evaluate how satisfied your customers are. I'm looking at McKenna and Randy. Do you guys, beginning with McKenna, do you guys look at, I'm assuming in the hotel industry, in the hospitality, you look at customer satisfaction, right?
Yeah, definitely. Every hotel guest that leaves the hotel, we try to capture as much information from them in order to send them out surveys, but also part of our standards that are part of like the Forbes 5-star standards is at checkout, if they decide to physically check out with a front desk agent, is to ask them how their stay was and to make note of anything that maybe didn't go well in their stay, but also then to note on their profile for future stays, preferences, things that would kind of customize their stay in the future.
Oh, got it. All right. Good. Randy, for you?
I mean, we definitely do net promoter scores. I know when I was working as a chemist, because before I moved to business development, I was working in the lab as, I guess, one of the technical people that I am now selling. We would constantly worry about our net promoter score because we had a huge contract with Eli Lilly. It was 60 chemists, and one of our KPIs was what's our net promoter score. It was one of 3, right? It was how many compounds we made per chemist per month. Our cycle time, like how long did it take from start to finish, our average cycle time. And then the third one, and the most important, was net promoter score. So we did it like literally every quarter, every year, everything. So net promoter score was huge for us.
But NPS with your whole company, not with you as a salesperson, right?
Correct. Yeah.
It's because again, it's unfair to take a look at evaluating a salesperson if the rest of his or her organization messes up.
Yeah, it's by case basis, right? So it's every individual contract, and usually the net promoter score doesn't fall on the salespeople; it falls on the technical team that's providing the service.
You know what? Indeed, it's an excellent point that you raised. But to be honest, every company that I've had a chance to work with and train, when they take a look at the customer satisfaction scores, where do you think customers' dissatisfaction is? Do you think it's with the product or is it with the service?
I'm pretty sure it would be with the service.
All the time. Almost 95% of the time it is with that. Even if they have a problem with the product, it is more the customer is willing to even forgive you because, again, you have excellent production facilities. You could still make a couple of mistakes with your product, but it's not about making the mistakes with the product. It's how you take care of the customers, which has got to do with the service component. And we'll get to it. And I think last time McKenna mentioned it, it's like depends upon your service recovery strategy, which tells the customer how you take care of them when things go wrong, which becomes a service part to a product issue. Does it make sense? That when a product fails, the customer is willing to cut you some slack because things happen. But it's not about that. It's about how you recover from it, which has actually got nothing to do with the product. It's got to do with how you take care of your customers when that happens, which tells the customer whether you're truly interested and invested in the relationship with them as well. So that's something that will come back. So the reason why I'm spending quite some time on this is the fact that when every time I see a net promoter score or a satisfaction score, actually what are you doing is you're indirectly measuring your performance based on the idea that when a customer evaluates you, a satisfaction is an evaluation of a customer saying, I went to you and I came to you to help me with a particular problem that I have. I went through a process, and how was I taken care of, and did you fulfill the need? And it's actually a measurement of their evaluation of the complete process where the customer is either happy or unhappy. If they're happy, they're more likely to be satisfied, and you have to make that link between satisfaction and performance with the following link. A satisfied customer is going to be a loyal customer, which means your NPS is going to be higher. And a loyal customer is likely to buy more from you. The more they buy, the more revenues you can create. They can buy more with upselling or cross-selling. You can also have customers who are loyal, who are usually less price sensitive. So which means that if I can take a look at my customers, if they're buying more and if they are less price sensitive, which means my revenue goes up. And at the same time, when you have customers, we all know that the customers can act as advocates. So when a customer says, I'm willing to promote you to other people, which means that you can easily attract customers. We've discussed this earlier as well. So which means that your cost of acquiring customers goes down, and you can actually start better planning so that you can keep your costs under control. So which means that if my revenues go up and my costs go down, which means my profitability goes up, which means what happens to your performance? Your performance is also likely to go up. So essentially what we're trying to say is that the way you understand the definition of the services here is deeds, processes, performance are from the viewpoint of your organization. What are the things that we do? What deeds do we do? How do we structure our processes? And if we do this well, how will this impact our performance? Right? But if you need to understand this, if we need to get all of this right, we need to understand that every action, every deed should be linked to a need of the customer. Every process of everything that we do should be done with the purpose of helping the customer when they are going through the process of fulfilling their needs. And when the customer does that, when they evaluate you favorably, it has an impact on your performance. And this connection is what you might have seen in the service profit chain, right? And that is what something we'll discuss a little bit later on. And this is this part. And if you want to take a look at the performance, essentially the performance, that is your ability to perform well, depends upon how well the customer evaluates you. And how well the customer evaluates you depends upon your ability to meet their expectations, right? And I said this is a very nice example. Some of you might have seen this cartoon before, but I'm going to come back to this cartoon in just a minute. This cartoon is a wonderful depiction of this model, right? Now, I'm going to pause for a minute and I'm going to let you guys take a look at it. And then I'm going to ask one of you to try and explain to me how this model works. You don't have to take a minute. 30 seconds is fine as well. I'm going to minimize this so you can take a look at the model. Is everybody able to see the model on the screen? Yep, great. So who wants to take a shot at it? Try to explain to me how this model works. Again, remember, this model has got to do with how the customer evaluates us. A positive evaluation would mean that the customer thinks we are providing good service quality. So who wants to explain this? Come on now.
Okay, I'll take a shot.
Yeah, that's it.
Can you just, yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know I almost need reading glasses. Okay.
The problems
of getting older. Yeah. Okay, so just generally, and this is like from our you have expectations. The consumer has expectations coming into their service model or what the model that we have, and then as they go through that, you know, the delivery, however it's delivered, designed for them, just like how you had it in there. The cartoon was saying, okay, this is what they described, but then. You know, being from Purdue, and you know, we often make fun of engineers.
Wait, please don't, because I don't know if you know that my first degree was mechanical engineering. Huh?
Yeah, so you know.
Yes, yeah. So
you know, engineers see it one way though.
Yeah.
You don't seem like the typical engineer that I know where so anyways, so you go through and it's designed and things like that, but does that design meet the values, the value of what the customer expected?
Yeah.
At that time? And then going on there, is there a gap between, we have all the different arrows where the gaps there, miscommunication, not knowing what, or sometimes customers don't know what they want. They try to tell you something, but they have a vision in their mind and they have a hard time articulating that to you, and you design something based on some vagueness because they weren't that detailed into that. So you have those gaps in there, and then coming back and saying, okay, what did their expectations then on that value? How was that?
Good. So again, for a person who just saw it for 30 seconds, not bad. Now, where does external communication come in here? You see that there's a gap 4.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm giving you a hard time, but I've seen this too many times for the past 20 years. So for me, this is like, I can do it in my sleep, but I can imagine.
Right. Actually, this is the first time I could have seen it in my undergrad, but that was 20 odd years ago. But so the external communications, to me, maybe the external communications are sometimes you're going through several different people. Maybe external communications, and there's a gap there in between, how we're communicating with the customers, maybe the project manager versus the designer.
Yeah, good. I think what you're saying is absolutely right. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to, again, first of all, thank you for being the first volunteer. I'm going to give others a chance to volunteer. Who wants to volunteer? Next, building up on what Andrea said. Brock, as my oldest student, not oldest in terms of age, but as a person who suffered through my class before, take me through the model.
Oh boy. All right. Yeah. Can you move down there we go.
Yeah, let me do this, yeah.
So I guess the way that I interpret it, this could be wildly wrong.
No.
But it's kind of that deviation between what you're doing internally and what your customer is expecting, right?
Nice, yeah.
So, applying it, sorry if this is wrong, but applying it to my own life, you know what I mean? That bottom half is what we're going to work through and how we're going to do it. And the top half is what they're seeing. So I want my machine back in 2 weeks. Reality is I've got to do enough work. It's going to take a month. And that's that gap in that customer gap here. I guess I'm pointing with my cursor.
Indeed.
You can't see it.
Indeed.
But that customer gap is,
Indeed. Pause for a minute because Brock, I'm going to let you continue. But so everybody, so this is what it is. So one of the things you have to take away from Brock is there are 2 parts to the model. The part of the model, one part is what the customer is seeing and evaluating. Remember we talked about deeds, processes, and performance is what happens to us as the service provider. Right? That is, if we do a good job, if the customer is happy, then we will reap the benefits of it, that which means that we'll be performing well. But for that to happen, we first of all have to make sure that the customer evaluates us positively. So which means that a customer, in the example that Brock just gave, has a problem where their machine breaks down. It can be a tractor, it can be anything, right? And by the way, the same thing can be applied for every one of you as well, depending upon your particular kind of case. The customer comes in with an expectation and the customer gets a service. So in the case of what Brock said is that the customer wants it delivered or at least problem fixed in 2 weeks. But the way you're set up internally, you cannot solve it before 4 weeks. So which means what is the value that the customer is getting is their expectation was 2 weeks, and what happened was the actual service they received took 4 weeks, right? Now, Brock, just build up on that. So is the customer going to be happy or not here?
In this case, absolutely not. So while you were talking, I can walk you through this step by step in an issue that happened today. I got a customer with a broke down intercooler, needs a new one. I've got 2 in stock. They're both broke. I can't ship them. His expected value is receipt tomorrow morning, so
Yep.
we can put it on the equipment and get it back in service. His perceived value is likely having it 3 days ago when he first ordered it. But resetting his new expected value is tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Reality is, in my mind, I'm not obligated to ship for another week because of his order profile.
Yeah.
So I'm still meeting my contractual obligation if I get it out within 7 days. How we communicate that to the customer, because it's not me communicating, it's our customer service department that had that conversation. There's a huge gap there, because to them, they're seeing this 7-day figure going, hey, we're meeting all of our reality. Meanwhile, I'm going, yeah, but I'm paying hours on a machine that's in service. Indeed. Right? So he and I have communication on a totally opposite plane of what the people driving it is. Indeed. And then as you come back down, our end customer, he's getting no service because he's got a $300,000 piece of equipment sitting idle.
Yeah.
And in our own minds, we're doing a great job because we're getting them apart in less than 14 days.
Absolutely. The key thing is that it's not in your mind as AGCO, your company, in your mind as that department that's fulfilling that part. Because in your mind as a salesperson, you know that you have to deal with the crud that's going to follow. Am I making sense out here? There are two things. As a salesperson, you're more concerned about, is my customer going to be happy or not? From the viewpoint of the people in logistics or the people who have to deliver it, they think we are doing it within 7 days, which means you're doing well. Does it make sense? There are two things even within your own organization, because you are the person facing the customer. So let me build on what you just said. So essentially, the simple thing, the customer wants it in 2 weeks, and let's say you get it in 4 weeks. The customer, there is a gap between the expected value, which is a customer wanting it in 2 weeks, and the perceived what actually happened was 4 weeks. Is the customer going to be pissed or not? That's all I want to know now.
Livid. He yelled at me for 5 minutes this morning.
And is the customer going to start thinking to say, you know what, let me think about it. Maybe because Brock did a good job, but the people within his organization are not helping him out. Do you think the customer is going to stop to think like that? Absolutely.
In this case, no. I mean, he doesn't care, right? I'm a target.
Indeed. In most cases, that's not the case. As far as the customer is concerned, the customer does not care to what happened within your organization. All that they care is, I had an expectation and I received the service, because it's at that point where they receive the service where they're perceiving the value that they're getting. Expectation was 2 weeks. I got it in 4 weeks. I'm not happy. So essentially, the higher the gap between what the customer expects and what they receive leads to a customer gap. The bigger the customer gap, the lower the level of satisfaction. Right? What happens? Lower the level of satisfaction, lower the level of loyalty, which means that if I'm not keeping the customers happy, my customers are not going to be loyal, which then defeats the complete purpose of trying to maintain relationships with the customer. Make sense? As far as the customer is concerned, that's all that the customer cares about. The gap between expectation and perceived value. Every time when your company asks for an evaluation of the Net Promoter Score, what the customer is telling you is the gap between what they expected and what they actually received. If you have a negative Net Promoter Score, that is, if your customers give you and tell you that they would never ever recommend you, or they would recommend you over their dead body, that probably means that the customer gap is huge. The customer's expectations were not met. Now, going back to Brock's example, let's say the customer has an expectation of 2 weeks and you deliver it in 2 weeks. So which means the expectation matches the perceived value. And at this point in time, your customer gap is 0 because the expectation matches what they get. So in all likelihood, when that happens, your customers are going to be satisfied, which means that evaluation is going to be neutral or positive. But what happens if the customer is expecting a delivery in 2 weeks, but they actually get it in less than 2 weeks? I'm sure that, forget about Brock's example, that a lot of times many of you buy things from Amazon, it says 3 days delivery and you get it in 2 days. Which means that the expectation was 3 days, and if you get it in 2 days, you are going to be a lot more happier. So which means that in those situations where the customer perceives the value that they get is greater than what they expected, that is when you have what we call customer delight. Right? Now, again, just like we talked about earlier when we talked about excitement needs, delighting the customer would automatically mean that the expectation of the customer goes up. So which means that, again, as we say, every time we exceed the value that the customer expects from us, the customer's expectation goes up as well. So now, as far as the customer is concerned, as Brock said, there are two parts to it. The first part is the customer's part, which has got to do with the customer expects something, gets the service, analyzes it, sees if their needs were met, and if the expectation matches the value that they receive, that's a perceived value, then the customer gap is 0, the customer is satisfied. But in most cases, what's going to happen is the expectation might be greater than the value that they receive, and when that happens, there is a gap and the customer is going to be dissatisfied. Now, as an organization, that's what Brock said, is we should start analyzing why is it that we as an organization could not match what the customer expected and deliver in line with the promises. And what you will see is that to help understand that, we have the other gaps, and the biggest gap in most companies, especially in business to business, happens to be between what the customer expects. That's gap number 1, as you will see here. Hopefully you can follow my cursor, where gap number 1 is between what the customer expects and do we as a company exactly know what the customer expects. There's a difference between I think I know what the customer wants as against I exactly know what the customer wants. So this is one big gap that you have here. Now, what typically happens when you have not taken the effort to exactly understand what the customers want, you take that incorrect information and pass it on to people within your organization who now work with the information about the customers given to them and then start producing the product, and they start discussing when should we deliver it to the customers. They start designing what they think is the perfect service to fulfill the needs of the customers. But unfortunately, what happens is if you have not understood the needs of the customers, you would already have problems here. So which means that if your gap 1 is big, gap 2 is only going to get worse. So what's going to happen is you're going to come up with all this and then you give it to the poor person out there who actually goes and delivers this to the customer. And essentially it is at this point, this is what we call moment of truth. The moment of truth is when you deliver the value from a supplier perspective to the customer, and the customer receives that service and evaluates whether the needs were met or not. So if my gap 1 is huge, I do not take the time to understand the needs of the customers, gap 2 is only going to make it worse. It's going to become enormous. So when you combine huge and enormous, by the time you give it to the poor service person here, huge plus enormous becomes ginormous, which means that the value that you're going to be delivering is not going to be in line with what the customer expected. Which brings us to the question, where do customers form their expectations from? And what this model says is that a lot of times, unfortunately, the way we communicate to the customers, usually either the salespeople or people who are in marketing who put forth brochures, unfortunately, they start making promises to the customers that the rest of the organization cannot keep. And when you go and tell a customer, when a customer comes in and says, hey, if there is a problem, I wanted to fix the problem within 7 days, and you have not taken the effort to understand whether we have the capacity to deliver this in 7 days, you are going to make a promise, and the moment you admit and tell the customer that you will fix their problem within 7 days, the customer's expectations are set, right? Now, this is what we have. That is the arrow that you see between the external communication to the expected value. A lot of times when we are managing relationships with the customers, we should take pains to make sure that we promise what we can deliver to the customer. And that's what we should be doing from a sales and marketing perspective, is that we should be as much as possible under promise and over deliver. Unfortunately, what happens in many situations is we tend to do the reverse. We overpromise and underdeliver. And what happens when that is the case is that the expectations of the customers become unrealistic and your organization is not equipped to deal with it. Right? Now, one other thing which I also want you to understand is the following. Now, in order for you to maintain a relationship with your customer, it's also critical for you to go and communicate to the customers when you have done the job right. So this arrow between external communication here and going all the way to perceived value here is something that many companies fail to grasp the significance of it. What do I mean by this is many times you deliver on the promise to your customer, but you assume that the customer realizes the value that they've received. But unfortunately, what happens in most cases, the customer only tends to remember bad experiences, and good experiences are completely forgotten. So this one is when you deliver a good performance, when you do a great job, when you are meeting the expectations of the customers, it is also your job to tell the customer, hey, this is what we promised and we have delivered it to you on time. It's called confirmation of performance to standards. That is my ability to deliver on my promise to the customer. Right? And that is something that you really have to understand here is if you forget to do this, a lot of times the customer might not even realize the value that they receive. What makes it more complicated from a sales perspective, especially in a business to business, is the person who signs your deal could be different from the person who receives the value. And if the customer has a silo mentality where the person who purchases in the customer's organization does not talk to their counterparts, what's going to happen is despite you doing the good work, if there is no communication internally there, the customer, the person who signs the deal might not even know how hard you worked to deliver on the promises to the customer. So unless you go communicate that to the customer is always going to complain about the fact that they will not necessarily get the value that they're paid for as well. So this is in a nutshell the GAP's model of service quality, which is as an organization, your main job is to close the customer gap. That is, we should make sure that we set the right expectations, and we should make sure that we are organized in such a way that we are delivering the value in line so that the customer gap becomes zero. Right? I want to pause here for a minute, and I want to ask you if you have any questions on this. I'm going to go back. Any questions on this? Well, if not, again, if you have questions, you can always type in your questions as well. So let's then, if that is the case, now that you understand this, let's go back. Now you know each of the 4 gaps. If you go back here, this is a more fun way of the same gaps model, right? And I like what Andrea said here is that what we refer to as gap 1, that is, do we as a company exactly know what the customer wants? The assumption here is that even the customer knows what they want. So I think Andrea hit the nail on the head when she said that a lot of times even the customer does not know what they want, which means that they can't communicate that well to you. When that happens, the responsibility is still on you as a supplier to find ways by which you can find out what the customer is saying and what the customer is also not saying. And that is your job, because if you don't do it, your customer is likely to blame you because they are not meeting their requirements, which means that they are going to blame you for it. And if I want to maintain a relationship with my customer, unfortunately, that is something that I will not do because my needs of the customers are not met. So if you go back, if you take a look at this and you take a look at this, so essentially if you take a look at gap 1 or gap 0, some people even call it gap 0, that is how the customer explained what they wanted as against what they really needed. Even if the customer is not able to explain to you as the service provider what their needs are, it's not fair always to go back to your salespeople and say you do not take the time to understand the needs of the customers, right? Again, that's an issue. But again, look what happens. Let us say, for example, you still do a fantastic job. You try to identify the needs of the customers, but then you put your own spin on it. Take a look at this. Essentially, this is your gap 1, where how you describe it, but you pretty much know. Let's say you've understood exactly what the customer wants. Let's say this picture, you have fixed it, that the customer wants a swing with 3 plates out here. You fix that, but you could still go and make a mistake of the way you communicate it to people within your organization. And guess what happens? The way you communicated is then taken up by the people out here. Where is this? Where you have how the engineer will design it. And then, of course, the assumption is that if they talk to each other internally, but if they, again, do not necessarily communicate this well, this is how the people who have to program it understand it. Then you then start offering it. This is your gap 3, how you deliver it. Then you have your service delivery, where what you install. My personal favorite, though, is this one. How you bill it in terms of to the customer. And when the customer calls you with a problem, this is what the customer gets, right? Again, this is a very nice representation of the GAPS model of service quality. And again, why are we talking about this? Is if the needs of the customers are not met, they are not going to be happy. And if they're not going to be happy, they're not going to come back and contribute to this. Which brings us to the main point of your assignment number 5, which is your service profit chain, right? Now, where if you go back to the previous slide, we talked about service quality. That is, if my expectation matches my perceived value, that is, my expectation is in line with what I get from you as a service provider, what's going to happen is that I am going to feel that I'm getting value. So if the more I provide good quality service, the more the customer feels value. External here refers to the customer. The more they're likely to be satisfied. The more satisfied they are, the more loyal they're supposed to be. The more loyal they are, I can make more money and I can be more profitable. Again, this is something that we have discussed in the past, but me asking you to read this is to try to illustrate exactly what we have been discussing all along in the class. And the only thing which we did not spend a lot of time earlier on is to understand that if I have to provide good quality value there, I also have to make sure that I take care of my internal employees. And this is something that, again, might be beyond the scope of a class on CRM. But what you need to understand is that CRM is not going to happen by just taking a look at my customer facing roles, that everybody within my organization also needs to work well to try and make this happen for the customer as well. So what I'm going to do right now is that I'm assuming that all of you know and have done the assignment and you know exactly how this works. So now I'm going to ask every one of you to unmute one by one and tell me how this service profit chain is applied to within your organization. What are the things that you're doing and what are the things you're not doing today? So who wants to go first?
I'll join.
All right, Randy. So I'm just going to keep this on. So essentially take me through the whole process. This is what we're going to do between now and 9 o'clock, or I want everybody to explain to me how it works so that if other people have questions, we can also take questions as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I'm a bad example, or I'm a good example of, I guess, a bad company that takes care of this. Mm-hmm. The reason I say that is because we're in the contract resource organization. So we work for other companies in a way, and employees don't necessarily feel that satisfaction of working for large pharma, for example. Yeah. They feel like, I guess, a second-rate citizen. So employee retention for us is rather difficult. We have I want to say at my last position with the 60 scientists that we had a 25% turnover rate year over year, which was huge for 60 people is an enormous amount of turnover. And the people that we were losing were experienced people, and the people that we were picking up were fresh out of college that we would need to train. And so it really did feel like we had brain drain year after year after year. So employee retention was an issue. That fed into employee productivity being an issue, right? So now the employees that are experienced are tasked with training the employees that were not experienced, which is greatly hurting our employee productivity. That, in a sense, lowered our numbers, lowered our metrics, which lowered our external service value to the customer, which then lowered the customer satisfaction. So our net promoter score was dropping, which then ultimately hurt our customer loyalty. And with that being said, that contract is actually no longer in existence at this moment in time. So we lost revenue growth at that point in time, and it all stemmed from employee satisfaction and internal service quality.
It's absolutely. And what steps are you currently taking right now to try and fix this?
Yeah, so that particular business model for us was called an insourcing model, right? So it was kind of a satellite of our company at that point in time. So we have our own laboratories, our own buildings, our own setups, and in those particular situations, we don't have that second-rate citizen feeling. Right? Because you're working amongst your peers. In this particular model, it was an insourcing model, which means we were inside Eli Lilly's facilities working on Eli Lilly's stuff, but we were AMRI, and we kind of were separated. We had our own floor, which kind of made us feel connected to each other. But in that sense, we currently don't have any insourcing models going on right now. So we had 3, and now we have 0. And so it could be an industry trend where industry is moving away from the insourcing model. We've had a couple opportunities for insourcing models, and I honestly don't know how we attack it a little bit differently. It's hard to get rid of that second-class citizen feel. But all of the people that were working with that contract, once it ended, I still stayed in contact with all those individuals. They now work directly for companies, and they feel immensely satisfied. It's almost night and day how nice they feel working for the company that they actually work for. A few of them are still in contractor roles. They moved to a different company, and they're working in contractor roles, and they still feel dissatisfied. I would actually say they probably feel more dissatisfied in their new role as opposed to working with AMRI previously. But the people that did land as actual employees at actual pharmaceutical companies feel immensely better.
Oh, so the fact, but are there any specific actions you're taking in place to make sure that, for example, for employee productivity? Because one of the things that I heard was that more and more your employees who are left behind actually have to train the young people. But are you looking at using new technology? So now make a link back to the sales enablement project that you did. So while the sales enablement was looking at helping a salespeople, but the technology can be used to onboard new employees much faster. So the same technology that you use to help your salespeople can be used for your existing employees to train their other employees, right?
Yeah, that definitely could help. One of the things that we did to try to combat employee retention was the year that we had a particularly bad. I'm pretty sure that was the year we hit like almost 30% turnover. We actually increased everyone's salary by 15%. Which helped immensely. So the next year it went from almost 30% turnover to only 6% turnover. But right after that, the next year it was back up again. It's almost like, and you mentioned earlier how you have to make sure that you mention to your customer what you actually delivered as a product. And in my mind, I remember reading a book or maybe it was a podcast, Freakonomics Radio. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Yeah, Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt. But they were talking about the headwinds, tailwinds concept, how when you're running, if you are running into the wind, you feel that wind constantly, and it's absolutely like it's grating on you, and you're constantly reminded that you're running into the wind. Well, as soon as you turn around, you'll think, oh, this is nice for about 4 minutes, and then you realize you're still running, and you completely forget about the tailwind.
Yeah.
And so it's the concept that people focus on their struggles and not what's helping them.
Well, but to be honest, that's something. So essentially, it's interesting you talk about this, and that's usually there's a different version of it, which is called prospect theory. It's not something that I want you to read about it or something like that, but just be aware of it. Is when you mentioned that you came up with a 15% increase in your salary, guess what happens? They're excited, but what happens to their expectation for the following year? It goes up. Now they expect you to come up with everything. Essentially, that's what it is. Because what happens is, after some point in time, year after year, when you start giving more raises, they start expecting it. They just gain more stuff. But essentially, what happens then is that there's law of diminishing returns, so they don't see the value of it anymore. So it's not surprising that it kind of had a tapering effect as well. But I'll be very curious maybe later on if we can do a one-on-one to try and see how you're trying to get employee morale. But more importantly, how are you trying to ensure that the mistakes that you've learned do not repeat and come to bite you in the behind afterwards? Because doing that completely negates all of your customer relationship activities from a sales perspective.
Yep, definitely.
Indeed. Thank you, Randy.
No
Who
problem.
wants to go next?
I can go next because mine will probably be kind of quick.
So is it Andrea? Wait, let me see. Is it
No,
Andrea?
it's Lexi.
Hi, Lexi. Go ahead, Lexi. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, mine will be probably pretty fast. So on mine, starting with like the internal service quality, so that's kind of different as far as like we don't really have like, as far as sales reps go, we don't really have an office because we work like in our specific accounts, like stores, bars, liquor stores, things like that. But like when we do go to an office, it is a really nice office. It's brand new. We just merged about a year ago to form the largest distributor in America. So it was Southern and then Glazers, and then we came together and created Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. So that kind of definitely helped like employee morale becoming like that large as far as that goes. But then there's also downfalls to that too, as far as like upper management goes. You know, you're kind of like taking two companies and putting them together, and they both did things differently. So we definitely have a little fallout from that aspect, as far as like upper management is still kind of in that adjustment stage. So that's where we kind of get an issue with like employee retention. They tried to like keep a lot, like when we merged a year or a little over 2 years ago now, I guess, but they try to like keep everyone. And that's kind of where you like get into a situation where we had like way too many people, and then we had a lot of like upper management issues. So we had pretty high turnover within like a year after we merged, because then they started letting people go when they realized that they had way too many people. So people were like really fearful of like losing their jobs. So they just went ahead and found a new one anyway. And then like as far as employee productivity, once that kind of started happening, productivity went down because people were like, at any time I could get let go because we have way too many people. So what's the point of working? So that's where we've kind of like in the past year been trying to like do things a lot better. So we've like employed different new technologies. Like we've been working with Salesforce and stuff like that to like help with productivity. And then also employee retention. So just like educating people on like how to use these new cool things, and so that they can take that with them with the rest of their life, and they're getting these like important skills that you can't really get anywhere else.
Let me ask you this, Lexi. When you had, so how long have you been at the company now?
Over 2 years.
Okay. Now, were you there when you had these people dropping left, right, and center?
Yeah, so when I first started, I started right when they merged in the state of Indiana. So that was kind of interesting, especially like fresh out of college, like going through a like merger as large as this one was. So that was kind of different. And then like for a while there was just like a lot of chaos because there were so many people working, and we didn't really know like where we were supposed to be going, and like upper management didn't know like what they were really supposed to be doing. And so then right around 1 year later, it just kind of like, I guess, hit us that like we don't need as many people as we have, and like it's really causing an issue as far as like people working over each other and like information not getting to where it needed to be. So they let go about 65 people, and like it was super sudden, so it wasn't like we really saw anything. So they let the 65 people go, and like everyone was really like upset. So they do employee surveys like once a year, and the employee survey like right after that was really, really bad because they fired so many people. Like, you fired my friends, you fired people I knew, and so like it's my job, you know, like I'm just a number to you all. So then right after everyone got laid off, a lot of people started leaving because like just fear of losing their job. So it's like, you know, I could literally get let go like next week when they realize that I'm not really like needed anymore. So I might as well just go ahead and like go find something else, when really that 65 people let go, like that's all they needed to let go. Like if anything, now we're a little short staffed. But and then on top of everyone kind of like freaking out and wanting to leave. which is really rough on productivity, like I said before, because when you fear that you're going to lose your job, you're just kind of like, well, what's the point of me working?
Let me ask you this quickly though. When this happened, did the customer face any kind of problem at all, or the fact that you are a monopoly saved your bacon?
So it helps save it a little bit, but as far as that goes, it really does affect it, because when you start like doing a big reorg is what we would have called it, because like not only did people get fired, like I got moved different territories and stuff like that. So you form these like really like huge bonds with these accounts that you have. Like they kind of become, your like, I'm friends with some of these people and stuff like that. So as far as that goes, that can really negatively impact like the service that we give, because, when you keep moving people around, like I can remember for a while, like I was moved around to different stores like 3 or 4 times. Like every time I went in, there was always like a line like, oh, like, wow, another Southern rep. Like, when am I going to get one that stays? Yeah. So that kind of like hurts us in the fact that like there's no loyalty, there's no trust, there's not a relationship that's been built, because a lot of the sales that I have in these accounts that I've had for now a year and a half, like I get those huge sales because I like have a good working relationship with them, and we've like known each other for a while.
And by the way, that's just not for you, but that's in many organizations which truly, if they are truly focused on delivering a good, in terms of delivering good value for your customers as well as maintaining relationships. One of the things when you go through reorg actually is, there's a lot of things that you mentioned that I want all of you to reflect on as well, is when you go through a reorg, first of all, if you're going to remove people and you're going to give the remaining people the same job and extra job that the old people were doing, essentially what you're doing is that you're overburdening the people who are remaining, who are already pissed off that you let their friends go. That's number one. And they're overworked. What then happens is that the person who now has to take care of the customer now has to take care of not just their old customers, but also new customers. And what's going to happen is that the new customer is not going to be happy. And I think that's what Lexi said, is that there you go, one more new Southern Indiana rep. And in this case, the very fact that you came in with Captain Morgan maybe saved you, because I know companies that would say like, oh my God, you're not professional enough to be working with us, right? And they'll say, I'm not going to be spending my time to be training a new sales rep. So what will happen is that the customer might lose their patience. And what's also going to happen is that when the person who now takes on the responsibility of the person who was let go as well, is even you cannot go back and visit your existing customers, because now you also have the additional responsibility of taking care of new customers, which means not only is your existing customer whom you were taking care of before going to be unhappy because they might not see you enough, but the new customer you're going to go visit as part of your new responsibility might feel that they don't want to spend the time to build a relationship with you. So essentially it has an impact as well, not only on your internal morale, but also on how the customers see this as well. And that's a good example that you say out here, is that, again, your customer is not going to be satisfied. But again, if you're a monopoly, they still have to come and buy from you. But for the others, if that is the case, they might eventually take the business elsewhere as well. And so, Lexi, if I continue on with that, is that have you seen, despite all this, have you seen a growth in your market share, or have you seen steady volumes and no dip in volumes because of all these changes?
Yeah, well, so now we've been pretty stagnant for about 1 year now. Like I'd say the reorg happened about a year and a couple months ago, so we're pretty stagnant now. But I mean, like this industry just changes so often, and I think our biggest thing is like my company has gained new suppliers that used to be with old, with other distributors. So that kind of like gives us a leg up as far as that goes. But it's always changing and everything like that. But as long as internally we kind of remain the same, it's really beneficial as far as our accounts go. Because I know some people that work for other companies that have had accounts for like 15 years. Yeah. So they're obviously going to have more, a better relationship and better loyalty to them than they are to, someone that's walking in the door for only a few months and then walking right out. So, as far as that goes, it's gotten better, but, each day at a time.
For me, this is fascinating because your internal turmoil has a big impact on your relationship with customers.
Yeah, yeah.
Indeed. So
it's
that's
like the crucial part.
Indeed. Okay, great. Thanks, Lexi. So who wants to go next? Thanks.
I can go.
Yeah.
So I kind of talked more about our hotel in general in my assignment, but just because we're such a small department, but we really do depend on all the other departments of the hotel in order for our memberships to be successful. And I think actually I've only been at 2 other hotels, but I actually think that the current hotel I'm at, even though it's the largest hotel I've been at by about double, it's probably the most seamless in terms of what we promise to a member or a guest truly does, for the most part. I mean, there's always those hiccups, but for the most part does translate into the service they provide throughout the resort. And I think that's a big reflection of how employees feel about the hotel. Yeah. We actually, it's kind of funny that Lexi was talking about that. Our hotel used to be a St. Regis hotel. So we used to have a big brand name behind us. And about 3 years ago, during the Starwood Marriott merger, we actually, our ownership decided to break off and become an independent hotel from Starwood and from a big kind of box organization. And luckily, most of our employees stayed. They not only were offered their same jobs, but they also received their same seniority, which for a lot of our line staff, we have people that have been there since the hotel was built, which it's a huge deal. That's kind of, you know, their livelihood is based on that. It wouldn't be so easy for them to go find another position. So that was really big that loyalty remained. And hotels are notoriously known for really high turnover, but surprisingly, our hotel, even though it does have that turnover, just seasonal staff and whatnot, we actually have pretty low turnover. And I think it's a reflection of our leadership and how that trickles down and empowers our line staff to really feel, not to use it again, but to feel empowered to make an impact on a guest's stay. And I think that's exactly why our guests feel so satisfied and they continue to come back and become repeat loyal guests.
Fantastic. By the way, for those of you who are interested in this component of how part of maintaining your relationship with your customers is going to be critical to the way you treat your internal employees, there's a very nice book called Human Sigma that you might want to consider reading, because it talks about how you have to take care of your people internally, because that is going to lead to that. And I love what you just said, because usually in pure services, we say one of those things is we say happy employees make happy customers, and happy customers in turn make happy employees, because you do not want to have a customer who's pissed off venting to your employees. And especially venting to the employees when it is no fault of the employee and there are problems that you have internally. And that is extremely critical in this case. And I think what you say is that if you build up on what Lexi said, is that it's lucky for you that in the world where there's a lot of competition, for Lexi there's no competition at least, but for you and in the hotel, in the hospitality industry, there's a lot of competition, is your people make the difference. The value that your customers are going to get. Of course, you need to have clean hotel rooms, you need to have great locations, you need to have good parking, valet services, name it. But at the end of the day, it's the people who make that business. And you mentioned something which I think is very, very critical, which is empowerment. Because what you will see in a lot of situations, especially when you talk about maintaining relationships with your customers, despite what we plan for, despite everything that we do, in fact, getting our blueprints right, making sure that we have good communication across different people within the organization, things are always going to go wrong. It's not about going wrong. It's how you empower your employees to not wait to get permission for every change or to take care of the customer. That is going to be the difference between an okay experience and a fantastic customer experience. And that is what is going to lead to a better evaluation from your customers. In fact, there is research that shows that customers who have had a problem have complained and have had the problem fixed immediately with good reasons provided as to why things went wrong, the customers usually tend to be more loyal after that incident because they feel that they have been treated fairly and they've been given adequate explanation, and they feel that the service provider there has taken the effort to respect their feelings and everything else. So that's something that you have to keep in mind as well. And you will see that if that happens, your satisfaction is going to follow as well. So I think that's one of the nice things that you have here, and I look forward to reading all of your presentations there as well. Now let's go to the next person. Again, thank you, McKenna. Who wants to go next?
I can go next.
Yeah, Andrea. Yeah.
So, education, like you said before, is a little bit different than, what the other industries that you guys else are in. But, in the end, our product is, an education, just like we're in class here receiving an education. So, starting at the beginning there, the internal service quality, being at a private school, people they really want to work there because there is a huge gap in the pay discrepancies between private schools and public schools. So, there's got to be a reason why you're there. So, like some of the employee rewards. So one of my huge reasons was being employed at the private schools is that I knew my children were going to go through the private school, so I receive I think it's now 100% tuition. I do not pay any tuition for either of my children. So if I take that amount and put it into as my salary, which many of the teachers do, okay, that offsets what I would be making at a public school. So, there's that, satisfaction there. Plus, the demographics of students that we have at the private school are very different than the demographics that you have in a public school, especially in, a urban environment like Fort Wayne or, IPS, South Bend Public Schools, something like that. So, the satisfaction, there with, the job environment and different things like that. So, and actually with all of those factors going in there, our employee retention is actually very high. We only have about 5% turnover every year. Like we lost 3 teachers this past year. And one, a lot of them are to retirement. The average teacher, the average amount of time that a teacher has been at school, I think, is around 7 years. Yeah. So there's a lot of longevity, with the teachers that are there. Also, when we talk about employee satisfaction, sometimes we actually get teachers that will retire from the public schools, but they are not done. They're at the point where they can retire, but they're not done working yet, so they will come teach with us for another 10, 15 years. So then, we have a good mix of, teachers where we're at. So, going into that customer satisfaction, are the students satisfied with, it's just not students, it's students and parents.
The parents, indeed. Absolutely.
The parents, in high school especially, you're looking at, the parents and the students, are they satisfied with teacher quality, facilities, different things like that, educational offerings, are they satisfied? And we graduate a high number of students, they go on to post-secondary or military, or they're, prepared to go into the workforce. So then, when we go into that customer loyalty, well, we look at, retention. So if you are, let's say, you're sending your oldest, there's two types of, families we're kind of looking at that come through our system. It's a family that maybe has moved into the area and is not an alumni of BD. So they're coming into the system the first time, and, so they send their oldest in. Are they satisfied? Are they going to send the younger siblings? If there are siblings, are those siblings going to come to the same high school? And then on the other factor, we have the alumni families, where we're at the point. The school is at the point where we could have had a grandparent, a parent, and now a child that has been at the school. So, 3 generations coming through the school. I'm at the point where I'm teaching my students currently in my classroom. Years ago, I had their parents in my classroom. And several of our teachers are like that too, where, you taught the parent and now the child is in the classroom. So that repeat business and referrals, and just keep going where it's that revenue growth and profitability keep coming around, where we have to have so many students. Our break even point is about 1,000 students, and we need to have that there every year for us to continue. We don't have the space. We have a point where we have to cut them off because we're limited to how many seats, and we don't want to go, we try not to go over 30 students in the classroom. The public schools here, we're short on math teachers. So I know this past year they were like at 42 students in a classroom. So, we have an area where we need to, where we do cut off enrollment if we need to.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, if I actually take a step back, so you see that no matter what, we had Randy talk about it, we had McKenna talk about it, we see that even though you're from a diverse set of industries, that there's a certain common thing in terms of making the link between your ability to deliver value to your customers depends upon having the right kind of people internally motivated to be doing the right things with your customers. And the more you do it well, the more you're likely to reap the benefits of this as well. So I think, again, thank you, Andrea, for this. Let's kind of wrap it up with Brock. So no, I've not forgotten Brock. So wait, and did I forget anybody else? No. Brock, you will be the last person taking us through this today.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is my entire world wrapped up into one little thing.
Yeah.
And I guess where I kind of focus, most of this messaging is to my dealers.
Yeah.
And helping them to realize their service organization is a profitable component of their business, because a lot of them tend to feel like that service portion of a business is simply a necessary evil, right?
Yeah.
I want to sell my big ticket items, make that relatively low margin, and I can't sell those if I don't have a service organization. The reality is, if they leverage that right, they'll make far more money in their service organization. So we do a lot of analysis on how this revenue growth is impacted by customer loyalty and driving that through. And what I focused on a lot in the assignment was all on measurement, right? So how can you measure your revenue growth or your customer loyalty, as well as your internal employee satisfaction? So we do a lot of measuring of like billable hours, like efficiency in the shop, as well as like comeback, right?
Yeah.
So you can't necessarily you can't be profitable if you're only billing out half of what your guys are working.
Yeah.
So we want to hit that 95%, as well as keeping those guys busy. Also kind of drives that satisfaction portion. If you're sitting around all day twiddling your thumbs wondering what's going to happen tomorrow, it's really easy to also feel like you're extremely expendable, right?
Absolutely.
So if we can keep them moving, keep them busy, that decreases our customer downtime, which drives up loyalty, the better experience they have with the unit, the higher retention we have. So that's how I'm scored, right? Is off of retention.
Absolutely.
And it's warranty registrations against previous customer accounts. Is a pretty standard retention measurement, right? And then like I'll do the internal analysis on all of my dealers to figure where they're at currently. So they hover right around that probably 60 to 70% billing efficiency number. And then we tell them target 95. And then you'll see in my paper there's a whole graph of how I chart out potential revenue increase tied to that, right? And then you can also come back and figure customer retention, the lifetime value of a customer because of their downtime. And then, after all of this is done, the last thing you want to measure is comebacks.
Indeed.
So a comeback can kill a customer relationship faster than really anything short of, lying.
And by the way, for everybody who is taking a look at this, what Brock is talking, and again, Brock, correct me if I'm wrong, what I like, which is unique about yours, you are the closest thing to what would be what Lexi does. Not that you're the same business. Lexi works for the distributor, whereas you are the manufacturer, right? And if I'm the manufacturer, so for example, going back to Lexi's, and I'll come back to you in a minute, Brock. If I am the manufacturer of Morgan's, and I have to rely on Lexi's firm, and if Lexi's firm is going through all this problem, actually, should I be concerned as a manufacturer of, was it Morgan's? Was it Captain Morgan? Lexi? Was it? Well, okay, Lexi's there. So the idea is that if I am manufacturing Captain Morgan and I'm working with Southern Glacier, and Southern Glacier is going through all these problems, right? Then as long as I'm a monopoly, it's okay. But if not, as a manufacturer, I will start rethinking whether Southern Glacier is the right partner for me to work, because my end customers are getting unhappy because of the service provided there. Now, what Brock is talking about right now, and Brock, correct me if I'm wrong out here, is that when we take a look at internal service quality, employee satisfaction, probably what you're doing is that you're actually measuring the quality as delivered by not your employee, but actually by your distributor, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So essentially, everything I talk in terms of employee satisfaction, I can probably talk about employee of my distributor and their satisfaction, with the idea being that if my distributor or my dealers employees, if they are happy, they are likely to take care of my customers, and consequently the customers are going to come back and give them more business. And if they give more business to my dealers, then Brock is going to be happy because my dealers are going to be happy to work with me. Is that correct, Brock?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
And essentially, so what in your case, what you're looking at is you're looking at the same service profit chain, except that you're using it to better manage the relationship with your distributor and dealer. So essentially, I love this example because this is rather unique in the fact that you use the same model, but you use this to better manage your relationship with the end customer, but you have to deal with your dealers in between, and you have to do everything in terms of showing to your dealers how they have to kind of, what can I say, invest in keeping their employees happy and satisfied, so that they can deliver value, so that the customer keeps coming back. And if the customer keeps coming back, your dealers and distributors are going to be making money. And if they are happy, you know that you're going to be happy as well. Huh? So, yeah. Indeed, I think that's, again, another way of taking a look at this. And I think the reason why hopefully all of you saw some value in this is that each of you might be working in a different business, but the dynamics of this is more or less the same. Is that your employees have a big impact on the way you deliver value to the customer. Now, if you want to think about it in terms of that, if your employees are so critical, onboarding your employees, communicating with them is going to be extremely critical. If I want to communicate with them very well, if you go back, and next week when we come back, I'm going to try and make a link to each of the technologies that you talked about. Remember, you talked about inbound marketing, you talked about sales enablement, you talked about customer success. Huh? So I'm going to try and make a link to how each one of them ties back to your ability to communicate the right promise to the customers, your ability to communicate in internally to your customers so that everybody gets the same information. It helps you to help onboard your employees so that everybody gets on board very quickly, especially in the examples that Lexi gave or the example that Randy was talking about where you have a lot of turnover. Then how can I try and make sure that I onboard my employees faster so that my customer does not feel the pain of it? And then of course the last thing is that how do I make sure that my students, my customers are successful in what they do? The example of what Brock was saying right now is that I want to make sure that I want to onboard my dealers so that they are successful. That's where customer success comes in. And so how all of this then links to your ability to maintain your relationship with your customers, and if you're working with dealers, not just with my immediate customers, but my customer's customer as well. Does this make sense? And that's hopefully that's essentially what I want. Where am I here? That's essentially what I wanted to show you guys in terms of saying understanding how we are in a unique kind of situation where we have to start talking about how let me see. So wait, where am I? Sorry about this. Okay, so we're in a unique situation where we have to understand that taking care of our customers starts all the way from making the right promises to the customers. It goes all the way to make sure that we educate the customers, we take them through the process, we onboard the customers, and then how do we make sure that we have the right kind of employees, and how do we onboard the employees, and then how do we make sure that we take care of them so that they can deliver the right kind of service. And if they do that well, how will that reflect in us coming back and getting more and more business as well? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to conclude right now, and I'm going to give you the chance to do kind of an extra credit for those of you who are interested. And the extra credit is going to be more along the lines of, if you take a look at the GAPS model of service quality, I want each one of you to reflect on what could be the reasons for each of the gap. And if you could send it to me by means of a PowerPoint, and I'll give you instructions soon, then I'll give you a chance to earn 2 points of a final grade, so that if you feel that some of the scores that you had were not exactly going to help you get the grade that you want, you could still make up 2 points by doing this extra credit assignment as well. Right? Is it okay? So that is one thing I wanted to ask. And I'll also ask, again, I'll send an email to everybody asking if we can move the class to next Tuesday. Is it okay with everyone? So just respond to my email and then we'll take it from there. So if I hear from everybody and everybody's okay to meet next Tuesday, then we'll meet next Tuesday. If not, even if one of you have a concern, we'll meet on Wednesday. Questions? Thoughts? Well, if not, I wish you all a pleasant night, and I will see you guys next week, either Tuesday or Wednesday, and I'll let you know exactly whether it's going to be Tuesday or Wednesday soon. Bye. So, I'll read. Yep. Right. Hang up.